So you think castles were just big rock buildings with fancy flags and maybe a dragon or two if you're feeling creative? Nah, medieval castles were basically the Swiss Army knives of architecture, equal parts fortress, fashion statement, and absolute chaos. These places weren't just made to look intimidating. They were rigged with wild designs that would make modern-day escape rooms look like kindergarten nap time. From murder holes to poop chutes, from architectural sneak attacks to bizarre animal roommates. Let's unravel the 10 most bonkers secrets hiding behind those stone walls, and trust me, it's way weirder than you were taught in school. These castles had guardrobes, which were basically bathrooms built into little boxes that stuck out from the castle walls. They had a hole in the floor, and everything just dropped straight down. Medieval castles accidentally created some of the world's first surveillance systems. Turns out they were the OG insulation system. Those giant woven art pieces weren't just for decoration. They were hung to trap heat and block drafts in giant stone halls that otherwise felt like a walk-in freezer. Without central heating, castles got cold. Like your breath is fogging up cold. So nobles were like, let's make our insulation double as fancy art. Some tapestries were so large they covered entire walls from floor to ceiling, basically functioning like medieval wallpaper made out of wool. The bonus? You looked cultured while not freezing to death. Thanks to curved stone walls, sound bounced in weird ways. A lot of people imagine castles as dark stone dungeons, but the interior's actually super colorful. Castle floors weren't just stone slabs. They often had imported ceramic tiles with vibrant patterns, even from places like Spain and Italy. And the walls, they were painted. Bright reds, deep blues, even gold leaf accents. What looks like a dusty old ruin today was once a blinged-out status symbol. Archaeologists have found paint traces in the stone, proving that medieval interior design was basically a medieval Pinterest board full of flexes. There were whispering corners where a sentence whispered on one side of the room could be heard clearly on the other, and DIY insulation with woolen murals. And it's only getting weirder from here. Castle architects didn't even have TikTok, but they mastered how to spy on people. Some castles even had secret air shafts and vents that doubled as ancient wiretaps. Want to know what the guests are whispering in the hall? Just stand in the secret listening nook and enjoy the tea. They design entire meeting rooms with secret connections to nearby chambers, just so the lord or lady could eavesdrop like a medieval CIA into the moat, into a pit, or just into the open air. Castle plumbing was less about sanitation and more about just get it out of the way. Some toilets had up to a 60-foot drop and doubled as medieval garbage disposal units. You think your apartment plumbing is bad? Try sharing a poop chute with a couple dozen people, then throw in no toilet paper and a cold, drafty breeze. Fun fact, nobles used wool or moss to wipe. The peasants? Sometimes just their hand. Yep, that's why the left hand became the designated wipe hand. That's also why you always shook hands with your right. Let's start with one that messes with your sense of direction and your bones. Enemies used these toilets to get into castles. Seriously, there are recorded cases where attackers actually climbed up the waste chutes to sneak inside. Imagine being so committed to storming a fortress that you're willing to swim through centuries of medieval sewer juice. Absolute insanity. Meanwhile, inside, people were actually storing their fancy clothes in these guardrobes. Why? Because the smell kept moths away. Medieval logic. If your closet smells like a public outhouse, your wardrobe stays safe. Bold move, 1300s. Bold move. Ever get dizzy walking up a spiral staircase in a castle? That wasn't just bad medieval construction work. That was straight-up battle strategy. Almost every spiral staircase in a medieval castle twisted clockwise as you went up. Why? Because most people were right-handed. If you were an invader charging upward, your sword arm would be crammed up against the central column. Good luck swinging that sword like you in a knightly anime duel. when your elbows jammed against 600 pounds of limestone. Meanwhile, defenders coming down the stairs, they had all the space in the world to slice, stab, and swing freely. It was like turning every staircase into a built-in boss level. Some castles even threw in stairs with uneven step heights just to trip you up on the way. Defenders knew which steps were sneaky. You didn't. Welcome to the medieval version of watch your step or die. Now, let's talk walls, because they weren't just there to keep people out. These suckers were thick, like 12 feet thick levels of thick. And guess what? All that space between the inner and outer walls, not just dead air. Castles hid entire secret rooms in there. We're talking escape tunnels, treasure vaults, hidden staircases, and even eavesdropping chambers where someone could straight up listen in on your conversations through carved holes in the wall. It was like having medieval Bluetooth spy gear. Some of these rooms only opened if you pulled the right candle holder or pushed the right brick, yes. Hogwarts style, but real. One castle in Europe had a hidden passage that led all the way into nearby caves so they could smuggle in food during sieges. While invaders were like, how are they still eating? The castle fam was just vibing underground, snacking, and surviving. Alright, brace yourself for the poop part, because we have to talk about the medieval toilet system. But it gets worse. On to something less stinky, but equally wild castle acoustics. Now, you know those beautiful medieval tapestries that hang on the walls of castles today? And speaking of secret layers, let's get into floors. Let's pause here. You've just scratched the surface of castle secret spy rooms, staircase death traps, poop chute invasions, acoustic surveillance. Let us move from the walls to the front door, because castle entrances weren't just oversized garage doors. They were weapons. You know that big wooden drawbridge in every cartoon castle? That wasn't just a flex. Some were designed to literally collapse under your feet. Yeah, surprise. You charge across thinking you're storming the castle like a hero, and boom, the center section drops like a bad Wi-Fi signal. Some castle towers and great halls had whisper gallery spots where you could stand 40 feet apart and still hear each other perfectly. Real-life castles were full of these. Not just escape tunnels, but actual rooms hidden inside the walls. Some were treasure vaults, others were spying chambers, and a few were straight-up oubliettes, tiny prison cells where you drop a person in and forget they exist. That's not hyperbole, by the way. Oubliette literally comes from the French word oublier, meaning to forget. A lot of them were only used part-time, especially the big fancy ones. Nobles might rotate between different properties based on the season, so some of these massive fortresses totally empty for half the year, like ancient airbends that sat dark and cold, just waiting for a surprise visit from the Duke and his 47 cousins, and the people who stayed behind. Usually a skeleton crew of servants, guards, and unfortunate rat wranglers tasked with keeping the place from falling apart or being overrun by birds, or ghosts, or both. These were usually located under trap doors. Someone misbehaves, trap door opens, you fall in, and you're still not ready for what's coming next. No ladder, no stairs, just darkness. Hope you like solitude and regret. Meanwhile, the guy standing 1 foot away heard nothing. Castles weren't just military bases, they were status symbols. So of course they had glass windows. Big deal, right? Nope. A lot of birds. Pigeons, crows, sometimes even owls. Imagine trying to eat your dinner under a ceiling hole while a pigeon dive bombs your soup. Luxurious. To make things even more chaotic, these birds lived in the castle, nesting in rafters, chilling in great halls, sometimes straight up stealing food from plates like feathery little goblins. And yeah, some people believed these birds carried messages from the afterlife or were signs of witchcraft. So if you thought a crow landing near you during dinner was just a coincidence, congrats, you've probably been cursed. Glass back then was ridiculously expensive, more expensive than gold by weight. So if your castle had glass windows, you weren't just wealthy, you were elite. Regular people were out here using wooden shutters or animal skins. Meanwhile, the castle crew had stained glass, catching sunlight like medieval Instagram filters. And when it got cold, you didn't just throw on a blanket. You lit entire trees on fire. Castles had massive fireplaces that burned day and night, sometimes using logs so big it took a team of people just to move them. Cozy? Yes. Environmentally friendly? Not even close. It was basically the medieval version of cranking the thermostat and setting money on fire. Castle architects were unintentionally building the world's first surveillance rooms. In places like Bodiam Castle, the Lord could literally sit in his chamber and hear what visitors were whispering at the front gate, thanks to how the sound carried. You think your phone is always listening? Try a whole building designed to snitch on your conversations. Medieval nobles had big walls have ears energy, and they liked it that way. The clever ones even had tilt bridges, like giant seesaws that would suddenly flip and send enemy soldiers flying into moats or onto sharp spikes. And yes, some castles straight up combined these with portcullises. That is the spiky iron gate that slams down behind you, trapping enemies between two gates with nowhere to go. That area was lovingly known as the murder zone. Not subtle. Imagine charging in all proud only to find yourself boxed in, arrows raining down from hidden slits, boiling oil overhead, and suddenly realizing this is a trap. Medieval engineering said, "Not today, Sir Chad-a-bad decisions." And just when you thought the moat was your only problem, turns out what was in the moat could be worse than falling into it. Sure, some moats had water, but that was expensive and hard to maintain, so castles got creative. Dry moats were filled with thorny bushes, wooden spikes, and sometimes even animal bones. Because why not add tetanus to your list of medieval problems? One Middle Eastern castle allegedly filled its moat with actual snakes. I don't know what kind of real estate flex that is, but that's less castle and more legendary Pokemon gym. Worse, many castles use their moats as trash dumps. Food scraps, dead animals, human waste. Yeah, it was basically a 24/7 soup of filth. Fall in? That's your social life over for the next year. You could show up to the feast wearing gold-plated armor, but if you smell like fermented cabbage and poop stew, no one's sitting next to you. Let's talk towers now. Not the Rapunzel kind, the you dash can dash here dash everything, the dash through dash the dash wall kind. Because these bad boys were acoustic chaos. Now onto secret rooms. Because what is a castle without hidden chambers and mysterious doors that open when you touch the third brick from the left? Let's shift from spooky to bougie for a second. Of course, all that warmth needed to go somewhere. So castles had giant chimneys and open roof vents. Know what else came through those vents? Birds. And finally, let's talk about where people actually lived in castles. Spoiler, most castles weren't 24/7 palaces. That's part 2 wrapped. You've now crossed collapsing bridges, poop moats, and pigeon-infested dining halls. Let's get a little weirder now, because believe it or not, some medieval castles were built on top of cemeteries. Yep, when castle architects looked at sacred burial grounds, they didn't say maybe we should build somewhere else. They said perfect spot for the dining hall. It wasn't just for the spooky vibes either. Building over older sacred sites sent a message. We own this land now, even the ghosts. These weren't the cute pet store ones either. They were the medieval plague-spreading, bread-stealing, nightmare fuel kind. One pair could lead to thousands of descendants within a year. So some lords tried hiring servants just to hunt rats, paying a few coins for every rat tail turned in. Rat bounty hunting was literally a medieval job. And still, the rats won. They were everywhere. One French king famously threw his crown at a rat during dinner. Traps hidden in the stairs, rooms behind the walls, toilets that emptied onto the heads of attackers. Think of flaming fireplaces as tall as a man. Think of guards watching you through secret peepholes. Think of trap bridges, whispering towers, and bats nesting in the rafters. These weren't just buildings. They were living, breathing machines of power and paranoia, and every stone had a story, and corridors that carried your secrets to people you didn't even know were listening. Every inch was designed for survival, intimidation, and just a little bit of medieval drama. He missed. The rat escaped. The bishop he accidentally hit. Not so lucky. And they owned the place. The walls, the floorboards, the kitchen's rats turned castles into five-star resorts. Because what says I'm powerful more than keeping a cheetah in your guest room? Royal castles were like medieval zoos. Not exactly ideal for reading poetry, but that was the point. Castles weren't supposed to be quiet. They were meant to overwhelm your senses and remind visitors that the person who lived there was rich, weird, and definitely not someone to mess with. Lions, leopards, monkeys, even elephants were gifted between nobles and kings to show off status. At one castle, they kept a bear in the courtyard chained up as part of the decor. At another, a baboon lived in the great hall and learned to mimic the priest's blessings. Medieval dinner parties were like Renaissance fairs if they were run by a cartoon villain with a bottomless wallet. And no matter how hard people tried, they couldn't get rid of them. Cats were the most common pest control, and some castles even had official castle cats listed on their records, like full-on staff. So imagine a dead bird served to you wearing its own feathers, wings out like it's doing a little dance. Presentation mattered. So did seating. Your place at the table literally determined your status. Sit too far from the Lord, you were nobody. Sit too close? Better watch your back, because someone definitely wants your seat. The Great Hall wasn't just where people ate. It was where they sized each other up, spread rumors, and made deals that could change kingdoms. Room and board included. Your job? Chase rats. Your payment? Fish heads and the occasional ear scratch. Leap Castle in Ireland sits on top of a prehistoric burial ground, and during renovations, workers literally found a pit of bones beneath the castle chapel. Not a poetic metaphor, a real pit of real human bones. Some with stab wounds. You don't just walk away from that like, yeah, seems fine. But in medieval times, totally normal Tuesday. Some castles didn't stop there. They used tombs as parts of the castle itself. Got an old crypt? Congrats, that's now a dungeon. The one at Chillingham Castle in England was originally a mass plague grave, before becoming a prison cell. Imagine being thrown into a cell and realizing you're locked in someone's former coffin. Bad energy doesn't even begin to cover it. And in many noble homes, the dead weren't far from the living. Like, literally feet away. Castles had burial crypts right under dining halls. You'd be feasting upstairs with music and laughter while directly below your feet, generations of ancestors were silently chilling in stone boxes. Medieval multitasking. Eat, pray, walk on your grandma. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Sometimes the dead were treated like roommates. In some chapels, tiny slits were built into the walls so that the scent of incense could reach the bodies in the crypts. Below, basically medieval Febreze for the dearly departed. People thought the prayers and sweet smells would carry to the afterlife. Kinda sweet, kinda creepy, very medieval. Of course, not everything hiding in castles was a ghost or a knight. Sometimes it was rats. So many rats. Still, cats couldn't keep up. Rats reproduce faster than medieval conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, the rich had their own weird problems. Exotic animals. And the noise? Next level. You'd have monkeys screaming, birds squawking, dogs barking, all in the same hallway where knights were practicing sword drills. Even the food was extra. At feasts, they'd cook peacocks and re-feather them before serving. And through all of it, the dirt, the grandeur, the wild animals, the backstabbing castles still stood. Because they weren't just homes or forts. They were entire ecosystems. So the next time you picture a medieval castle, don't just think of gray walls and cold stones.